You know, and so
even though you're getting this paycheck,
right,
and you're doing great, and you know, what did your colleagues? I mean, how did they, you know, approach you or look at you then at that point? I mean, were they saying things, you know, behind your back, saying, McPherson, he's lost it or something?
Well, after I left active service at the university and
no,
moved,
I'm saying while you were still there.
Oh yeah.
I mean, were they, you know, was there an undercurrent? You know, because they wouldn't allow you to teach.
Right. There was some of that.
Yeah.
There was also when I would have my colleagues come to my classes, relatively early on in all of my science courses, I would have students complete a significant piece of art or literature as a major part of their grade. Because I believe strongly that the culture has been divided into two cultures. One track that has the arts, you know, the musicians and the artists and poets, and then on this other track we have the natural sciences.
Writers.
Yeah, and really they don't come together very often. And I wanted to have my students create for themselves a whole life, not a narrow track life like I had at the time. I was a specialist in conservation biology. It was this wide for all practical purposes. And I wanted my students to know that there's more to life than a job, that there's more to life than conservation biology or wildland vegetation management or fire ecology or whatever the course was I was teaching. Mm-hmm. I wanted them to know that the arts and the natural sciences are connected and they're integral. And to understand one, it's really helpful if you understand the other.
Well, isn't this one of the things that you point out with this fellow that what was it, in the 18 whatever it was, and he came up with the idea of carbon. He was a scientist, he was a
naturalist.
Governor, he was
a naturalist and an ambassador.
An ambassador.
George Person, think about that for a minute. We don't have ambassadors today that are anything other than attorneys.
And you pointed that out to me, and that struck me deeply because I think that is missing from our collective narrative, is that we specialize so much. Well, I'm a surgeon that operates on little toes or something, you know.
Right.
I mean, that's something.
There are hand surgeons.
Yes.
That's all they do is operate on the hand.
Yeah.
That's their whole life.
They don't go above the wrist.
You know, to great benefit of people who have hand injuries, to be fair. Yeah. But, oh my goodness, your whole life is the hand.
Yeah.
And in this society, we tend to be rewarded for that level of specialization. Yeah. Our knowledge fits into a smaller and smaller, narrower and narrower silo, and we can go deep on that silo. But is that a whole life? Is that a whole holistic life?
And you know, and that's why I say that gets back to my question, was that at the point where you were not allowed to teach anymore and you left, you know, I mean, you made that choice. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you say many times, mistakes were made. However, you made that choice knowing full well, you know, that you were stepping out into the unknown.
Right.
And, you know, and there's a lot to be said for that, you know, because in this life, there's a lot of people that will not step out into the unknown.
Yes.
You know, and just say, to hell with it, I'm going that way just because that's my calling.
I agree. It was a very uncomfortable thing to do. It was a very countercultural thing to do.
Like a hippie.
and I've taken those kinds of steps many times.
You were born, what, in 67?
60.
Oh, in 60, okay.
So I did largely miss the hippie generation.
Yeah, I did too.
You know, the summer of love was when I was 7 years old.
I was 12.
And I grew up in Weippe, Idaho.
And I got long hair.
You know, I grew up in Weippe, Idaho, and the 60s didn't come to Weippe until the 80s, and by that time we were in the midst of the Reagan Revolution.
And by then it was just kind of some clown fashion or something, right?
Right.
You know, hey, look at this. Hippie.
Yeah, so
grateful.
So I was too late for the American Cultural Revolution, really. It happened, and all I could do was study it in retrospect.
Well, I think though that you made your own cultural revolution though, in a sense, because you took it that step further, and started teaching, radical,
Yeah.
like that, that check mark, which is a radical, and
Right.
says we're going to get to the root of these problems. Let's ask the question.
Right. I did some things that were considered to be insane by my colleagues because they were beyond the dominant narrative. And I continue to do that. I'm the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction because I'm willing to connect a few dots that others are afraid of.
For that. You're the world's leading authority, eh? In my backyard? Here in Bolingbrook, Illinois?
No, and it's not that I want humans to go extinct.
No.
But I have this background in conservation biology, the tenets of which are speciation, extinction, and habitat, instead of atmospheric science or physics, which is where most climate scientists are. And so I'm able to connect a few dots leading to the conclusion that our demise is going to happen in the near future. It's not that I want that to happen. I don't even want to die myself. I mean, I have those days. Louis C.K. does this. Louis C.K., the stand-up comic and social critic. Oh man, he does this piece where he says, "All the people alive today are just the people who decided not to commit suicide yesterday." Yeah. It's like by a razor-thin margin. You look at those people and they're like, "I'm so miserable. I don't know if I can get through another day." But they do. But we all do.
And the way he says it, though, is how his eyes get real big too.
Yep. Yeah.
If you notice his timing on that.
Oh.
You got to get your timing down.
He's awesome.
You could be a comedian.
Yeah. Maybe in my next life. I think time is a little short for that this time around.
Come on, you could do it. Now let's.
I think that's what I'm doing.
I think so.
I go around and I talk to people, and to the greatest extent possible, I try to make it stand up. Tragedy.
Well, right. And, and that's. I think that so much of what we look at in this world is a tragedy.
Yes.
The classical painting of the mask of the sad face and the happy face. There's a tragic and a happy side to
Well, of course, tragedy includes comedy. It always has.
Yeah. So that you're Now, let's talk a little bit about you do a program that works on grief recovery or something?
Right. So I completed the grief recovery workshop in January of 2014 and was designated a specialist in the grief recovery method. And I have never used that in the way it's intended, which is to get the certification that you could slap on your wall and then start serving as something of a therapist for people and charge them money for it.
Yeah.
I took it because I realized that my, quote, bedside manner could be improved a lot in my presentations. And instead, within an hour of the workshop starting, it became clear to me that this was going to be incredibly useful for me personally, to a far greater extent than it was going to help me professionally.
Yeah.
I didn't know what grief was. We don't talk about it in this culture, like so many things that matter. We don't talk about grief, we don't talk about death, we don't talk about sex, we don't talk about bodily functions. When was the last time somebody came up to you at the water cooler and said, "So David, how was your bowel movement today?" Right?
Pretty damn good.
That's far more important to your well-being.
I just wrote a song about that.
than whether
nobody wants to hear my song, but
it's far more important to your well-being than whether the Cubs won today, right? But that's the water cooler talk.
Did they win? Well, it's true. Yeah. They're yeah.
So there are all these topics that we don't talk about, and grief is one of them. So I actually learned in the process of that workshop what grief actually is and how it applies to my life.
And that there are these stages and we vacillate between them.
Yeah, this is the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross approach.
Right.
Right, with the 5 stages of grief. And even she pointed out that they're not discrete. They're not steps where you just jump from one to the other. No, she recognized that you go back and forth. That most people start in denial denial of abrupt climate change, denial of the
My
sixth
mother
mass
died or
extinction,
something.
denial of, right, and she was focused on individual human beings and their grief.
Yeah.
And so usually we go immediately into denial. No, that can't be happening to me. I'm not going to die.
What are you talking about?
Exactly.
That doesn't apply.
And then her next step is anger. You know, to lash
How
out
dare
at somebody.
you?
Yeah. It must be the doctor's fault. It must be the
doctor?
the Philip Morris
You're
that made the
only one around here
cigarettes.
who's a doctor that I know.
And so we go through these stages, and she pointed out that we go back and forth, and it's similar.
Anger. All right. So you got your
Denial,
your
anger, bargaining.
bargaining.
We can fix
wait
this.
a second. Yeah. Let's see.
Electric, squirrely light bulbs,
well,
electric cars.
Swirly light bulbs. All right. Let me find them. All right. plant some
Everybody needs
trees.
to go vegan,
Vegan. Yes. Oh,
and
boy.
on and on. So there's all these
Yeah.
bargaining tools that we use to try to convince ourselves that we can actually
So that's the
negotiate
third.
with nature.
That's the third.
Think about that for a minute. Negotiate with nature.
Yeah.
Depression is the next one. You know, so this is when people
I
are
feel
really
like
close.
hell.
This is when people are really close to going through the whole thing
Yeah.
because they get it and it's
Yeah.
weighing them down and they're bummed out and it's horrible.
They're done fighting it. They're
Right.
done bargaining. They're done.
And then there's acceptance. Then there's the acceptance that yes, I too am going to die.
The doctor's right. I've only got 2 months.
Right.
Ah.
I mean, it's, at some point, we all accept that
Yeah.
we are going to die. And then we sort of push it aside until we get our own terminal diagnosis. And then we go through those stages again, so back and forth we go.
Right. I think that was her. That was her message, though. Was that it wasn't a like you say, like a 12-step program.
Right.
It was.
Right.
It was more like you can be here, you could be there, you could be there, you could be back here, and you could start all over again, and then get to the end, and then now. I always like. Are there 5 stages or 6?
She identified 5 stages.
I think
Some
you
years ago,
identified-
I identified a 6th and then a
There-
7th stage.
A 7?
Yeah, it's hard to
Wait
imagine.
a second.
So the 6th
Folks, listen close.
and the 6th stage, Chris Cassell sent me an email message and called me on the phone, and he says we're pitching this video series, and it ended up being the National Geographic television show with Bill Nye called Bill Nye's Global Meltdown. But this is
yeah.
this is before they were approved to do it. So he's Castle Picks. Him and I think one other
About a
person
year and a half ago, 2
comprised
years
Castle
ago.
Picks. Yeah, a couple of years ago. And so he ends up calling me on the phone and he says, we're going to wrap this thing around what you've been using for your talks lately, which is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's 5 stages of grief. And he said, I think most people are familiar with that, but we're going to pitch 6 episodes and there's only 5 stages of grief. And I said, it's okay, Chris. I've got this. There's a 6th stage. And it's really quiet on the other end of the phone. And I said, aren't you familiar with gallows humor? And he clearly wasn't, because he hadn't seen my latest presentation.
Gallows humor.
And this is beyond acceptance. This is when we actually make a joke of the absurdity of our lives.
You mean the guy with the rope around his neck is making a joke?
Exactly. How could you not?
I don't know. I don't have a rope around my neck.
Yeah,
But
and-
I mean, just imagining it.
Albert Camus, the philosopher who was awarded the Nobel Prize in Literature, was the absurdist philosopher.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, and
Yeah.
if you think about it, the whole thing is so weird. The whole thing. After 13.8 billion years, the universe cooked up humans somehow through a series of absurd steps.
And what is it, like equivalent to the last 2 cells on your fingertip or something?
If this is 13.8 billion years, then this is the human experience,
There it is,
right?
right
The last
there.
few cells, and we
Maybe
think it's
2
all about
cells,
us, right? Which is weird.
Yes. And that is absurd, to
And-
think that we're so darn important.
Right. And then what do? Look what we do with our time. We mow our lawns, we trim our trees. You know, instead of fully living in the world, in the natural world, in nature, we're trimming up nature to make it suit our desires. And we're running around on a treadmill and we're doing these. I mean, if you actually take a long view or imagine you're a space alien looking down at Earth and seeing all these people running around like little ants, how could you not come up with the conclusion that's absurd? Almost everything we do is bizarre, it seems to me.
Okay, so that's number 6. Now number 7, I'm not sure we can say.
We can say F it.
Oh, you mean
right?
forget it?
Yeah.
We'll say
F it.
forget it, but
It starts with an F and rhymes with truck.
oh,
F it. Uh-huh.
so you know.
And for some people,
this
they
Kubler-Ross lady, she didn't have it right.
no. She was 2 steps short. She did pioneering work, and I just added on to it.
I think she absolutely did. And
I
changed
sit
a
on
lot
the
of people's
shoulders
lives.
of giants.
Yes.
Right, that whole thing. She was the giant. I just added a couple of steps.
Well, I don't think, I mean, did you add them, or were they already there?
No, they were already there.
They
I
were
just
there.
identified them.
You're just like, oh yeah,
Just like-
that one.
She didn't invent the 5 stages. She just recognized them.
Yeah.
She just discovered them. In the same way, I discovered the same thing. And F it doesn't mean that I'm throwing in the towel.
No, I know.
Right, it doesn't mean I'm
You know,
curling up in a ball and dying.
blow your brains
no,
out or
No,
something.
not at all. And some people misinterpret it that way. But really it means
Accepting or
not only
wait, that was
not
one of-
only accepting, not only making a joke of the whole thing, but deciding that there are some things that are no longer worth doing.
Yeah.
To heck with those things.
Yeah.
I'm just not F it. I'm not going to do those anymore. I finally realized how absurd that is to mow the lawn. So I'm just, whatever, I'm not going to mow the lawn
Too
anymore.
close. I haven't mowed the lawn here in a month.
I know, that was my inspiration for that comment. You're doing a great job
You
not
got
mowing the
milkweed
lawn,
going
Dave.
here. I've been looking for the. I only saw one monarch this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's really kind of annoying. And I plant the milkweed, and I'll be a son of a gun. I saw one last week. The thing fluttered around, and I was thinking, oh, just one.
How sad.
There should be like thousands of them, right?
Yeah.
Well,
It's just a cycle, Dave. I wouldn't worry about it. These things come and go.
Come and go, right, sure, Well, I don't know. Now, Doctor, is there anything in closing that, I mean, if you really wanted to tell the world a message, what would it be? I mean, without laughing, without making a joke out of it, without,
That's hard
without
for me to
saying
do.
truck or something.
Fire truck.
Yeah. Fire truck, yeah, just...
As Edward Abbey wrote, what am I trying to say? Everything. Nothing more than that. I've been carrying this message for a very long time and trying to encourage people to throw off the shackles of this set of living arrangements to the maximum extent they can. I mean, almost everybody still has to go to a job to make money, to keep the lights on and so
Pay
forth.
the taxes.
Sure, and I get that, but we don't have to go to work 18 hours a day every day. We can spend time doing the things we love with the people we love and acknowledging the absurdity of it all, the miracle that we got to be here at all. I mean, isn't that enough? I have a good friend, a Canadian, who spends all of his time and has for more than 8 years now, pet sitting and house sitting. And a primary motivation for him pet sitting is the inspiration of his four-legged friends. Because who lives in the moment better than your dog or your cat? Right? I mean, they're
do they
fully
see?
present in their reality. You go to the park with 4 trees in the sun and the dog sees 4 trees in the sun and you see everything cluttering your brain about the bills coming through the door and the car trouble and the blah, blah, blah. And so Paul spends a lot of his time rolling around on the ground with the dogs, and acting like a 4-legged animal, being fully present and enjoying the world that we have been given for better and worse.
Yeah.
You could do a heck of a lot worse than that. And, in the end, I encourage people to think about, oddly enough, their legacy. A strictly human idea. Dogs don't think about their legacy. Wolves don't think about their legacy. Cats, chickens, nothing We're the only organism that I know about that thinks
What are we
about
gonna
our
put on
legacy.
my tombstone? What do you want
Right.
on your tombstone?
Exactly. And so I used to have my students write their epitaph, write what would appear on their tombstone, and that's hard, because that's just a few words. What do you want to define you? And then I would ask them to write their, what at the time was called obituary and now is called funeral notice or something like that. So you get to expand a little bit. You get a couple of hundred words to describe your life.
Yeah.
And so I was trying to encourage people to think about what they wanted to be remembered for when they were no longer alive. Did they want to be remembered as a parent, as a sibling, as a worker, as somebody who facilitated other people's service? What do you want to be remembered for? And try to let that tell you where to go with your life. Because we all want people to say wonderful things about us when we're dead, obviously. But
they certainly
will
didn't
they?
say it when I was living. What the hell? Oh, he was a great guy. Really, he was, guy.
so, I mean, it's just an exercise that might be
That's a good
worthwhile.
one. That's a good one. That's a good one.
Because it encroaches on a couple of topics. Death, one of those things we almost never think about.
Right, right. Like you were saying, death, bodily function, sex.
Yeah. The unspeakable, grief.
Grief. Yeah. My mother died. I feel like crap. You get over it. You know.
Right, right.
Go away. Come back and see me next week.
So it would facilitate students thinking about things that this society tells us we should push away, and then also it might help define you. Most of us are defined by the work we do. Right? You meet somebody new at a party and they ask, what do you do? And what they really mean is, how do you make money?
Yeah.
How do you grind the living planet into dust?
How does your bank account grow?
But is that all we are?
I steal from poor people and children and widows.
Are we slaves for the machine? I think most of us don't want to be remembered that way, and so therefore we really don't want to live that way.
Yeah, but I mean, we're brought into this living arrangement, as you always say, and we are kind of, we are kind of slaves to the system.
Of course we are.
We're like brought into this system wherein they tell you, this will be on the test. This is going on your permanent record. And you, sir, go stand in the hallway. Okay.
But we can be so much more than that. That's my point.
Yeah.
We need not be defined by the work we do within this system. That need not define us. That need not be all that we are.
Right. The dollar value.
Right.
Of our lives.
Exactly. So we can play music. We can hang out at the old folks' home. We can provide gifts. We can provide service to other human beings, and
be lazy.
And be lazy, and be fully present, and just be. Right. Instead of humans doing, we can be humans being.
I'm a firm believer in laziness, kids, because laziness pays off right now.
Right. You don't need to wait for the payoff.
Right here. I think I'll take a nap.
Yeah, it's one of those countercultural things.
I don't know if it's countercultural. It's natural.
In this culture, it's countercultural.
I guess.
There's the drive to succeed, which caused me to succeed. That was one of the big reasons why I ended up.
You still feel like you're a success, right?
Yes.
I mean, at this juncture in your life,
yes.
I mean, you're way past, walking around with the mortarboard and the, Professor Dr. McPherson, I mean, you're way beyond that. You still feel like you're a success, don't you, today?
Yes, for a couple of reasons. I was successful in this culture by cultural definition of success. I made the money and taught the students and had this position, sophisticated position, blah, blah, blah.
Thank